To date, the case of Emilie Meng is one of the most talked about criminal cases in Denmark. It took years but has only recently been resolved. It involves a serial killer on the loose, preying and committing horrific acts on young girls. The news of this crime was in stark contrast to the statistically low crime rate of Denmark, and where the citizens generally love to enjoy nature, peace, and there's even a Danish word to describe that cozy, comfortable feeling one gets by sitting by a fireplace with a good book. Hygge. From the country that is the birthplace of Lego, one would not expect such a shocking crime. Apologies in advance if I have mispronounced any Danish names. Let's go. On Sunday, July 10th, 2016, at 1 a.m., Emilie Meng and her friends were hanging out in their basement, getting ready for a night out in Slagelse. The two had just finished their first-year exams at Slagelse Gymnasium and wanted to celebrate the start of summer break. Their plan? Take a quick ride from Korsør station to Slagelse and have a fun night in the city. At first, Emilie was wearing blue Puma sneakers, a t-shirt, and tight jeans, but later she changed into a black, long-sleeved lace top for the evening. A male friend eventually joined them, and the group headed out to Slagelse. They spent part of their night at the Shisha Cafe. Emilie, who had also been happy and bubbly earlier, suddenly seemed distracted after receiving Facebook messages from a boy she was seeing. According to her friends, they had been arguing, and there was uncertainty about their relationship. This disagreement definitely affected her mood. Later, the group grabbed some food at McDonald's. Emilie and her best friend walked a little while behind the others, still talking about the situation with the boy, who had told her he didn't want to continue seeing her. Emilie was clearly upset. But throughout the night, Emilie and her friends were polite and well-mannered. There was no signs of alcohol or drug use at all, either that night or in Emilie's life in general. Emilie was known to be a vegetarian, someone who cared deeply about animals. Her friends described her as kind and thoughtful, a regular churchgoer who sang in the choir. In fact, she had church at 9:30 a.m. the next morning. After eating at McDonald's, the four friends boarded a train back to Korsør. The train ride from Slagelse to Korsør is only about 9 minutes long. They sat on foldable seats in the aisle, and one of them called a taxi during the ride. Emilie's phone was low on battery, and she tried to charge it on the train. Originally, it was planned that their male friend would stay overnight at Emilie's house, since he lived further away. But Emilie changed her mind, saying she wanted to be alone that night, likely because of the argument she had earlier. When Emilie and her friends arrived at Korsør station at 3:53 a.m., friends repeatedly asked if she wanted to join them in the taxi, but Emilie declined, saying she wanted to walk home alone while listening to music. Even though her phone's battery was running low, Emilie had a habit of walking off her emotions. It was something she often did when she felt upset, taking long walks with her headphones in. One of her friends later explained why. If we were angry, sad, or upset, we'd go for walks and listen to music. It was the only thing that helped. The walk home was only 1.8 miles. They were concerned about her walking alone, but reassured themselves, thinking, "We drove past her in the taxi, and the last thing we saw was she was still walking on the path. I thought, nothing's going to happen. It's Korsør, almost nothing happens here." That morning, Emilie's mother, Helen, went up to Emilie's room to check on her, knowing she had church choir practice coming up. But, to her surprise, Emilie wasn't in her room. Helen called her daughter immediately. The phone didn't ring. Text went unread. Worried, Helen called one of Emilie's friends, Sarah, who had been out with her that night before. When Sarah mentioned that Emilie had decided to walk home alone, Helen's heart sank. Cold shivers ran down her spine, she said. She instantly feared something terrible had happened to her daughter. Emilie had once gone to Copenhagen by herself and didn't stay in contact for a while. Sometimes she just needed space to clear her head, especially when she was upset, like she had been that night of the argument with the boy. Helen considered that maybe Emilie had gone to church early, but after checking with St. Paul's Church, they confirmed Emilie hadn't shown up. This was unlike her. She was the type to always follow through on her commitments. By 11:49 a.m., the family had contacted the police and filed a missing persons report. Once the alarm was raised, the community sprang into action. Volunteers from the town joined local police, scouring the area in search of Emilie. Despite their best efforts, there was no sign of her. The police interviewed Emilie's friends and any witnesses from the train station that night. Two young men who had been on the same train as Emily recalled seeing her during the ride. One recognized her by appearance. After they all got off the train, one of the men stopped by a hedge to pour out some water. While standing there, Emily walked past, looking down at her phone. She was focused on her phone, one of them said. Shortly after, the two men were picked up by a car and they last saw Emily heading towards Stopbelts Veg. This matched what Emily's friends had told the police. Her best friend said that the last time they saw her, she was fiddling with her headset before turning away. I don't know what happened to her, she remembered thinking. Emily continued texting her friends until her phone's battery died around 4:03 a.m. After that, there was no further signal from her phone. The route Emily took to get home wasn't covered by surveillance cameras. She had headed on a deserted gravel path leading away from the station towards Courceux. The path runs through a hilly area and leads to a tunnel on the other side of the motorway. On the other side is a Solbakken nursing home, which has a surveillance camera pointing towards the road. Dennis, the heating engineer of Solbakken, told local media that the camera was working and filmed the road on July 10, 2016. But Emily never appeared on the footage. This led to the disturbing conclusion. If Emily followed the path as her friends had said, she never made it past the tunnel. Despite the growing concern, volunteers and local police kept searching, but no trace of Emily was found. Emilie Meng's disappearance sparked fear across Denmark. Parents began picking up their children directly from outings or giving them money for taxis to make sure they got home safely. A local group called the Night Ravens started patrolling the area near the train station on bicycles after reports surfaced of young men approaching girls around the area. The police received several tips, leading them to investigate 3 suspects. One was a 33-year-old truck driver, and another a 67-year-old man whose house was searched 5 times, though neither led to a breakthrough. One of Emilie Meng's neighbors grew suspicious of a 67-year-old man named Finn Peterson after hearing strange noises coming from the house. Twice, the police searched his home, but they found no evidence linking him to Emily's disappearance. Finn was eventually ruled out as a suspect. The focus then shifted to a 33-year-old truck driver from Kolding named Amel. He was arrested on August 30th after a former friend reported his suspicious reaction to Emily's case. Police searched Amel's house, seized electronic devices, and investigated an excavation site near his home, but they found nothing. Amel's past criminal behavior involving a minor, combined with his job as a truck driver, then took him across the country, making him an appealing suspect. The police were convinced they had found the man responsible, arresting and charging him, but Amel maintained his innocence. He claimed the police had unfairly targeted him and hadn't even bothered to verify his alibi. When investigators finally checked the GPS data from his truck, it revealed he was out of the country when Emily disappeared. Amel was released, but not before the ordeal caused him and his family significant distress. With no further evidence, all 3 suspects were eventually cleared of any involvement in the case, and 5 long months of searching and investigating, Emily's family was in despair. The pressure on the police to solve the case mounted as leads dried up and public frustration grew. Under this pressure, the police released 3 possible theories. The first, that Emily had decided to run away and start a new life elsewhere, or she had been involved in a traffic accident, and lastly, she had become the victim of a violent crime. With hope fading, a confidential hotline was set up so witnesses could anonymously share any information. Emily's family also offered a 200,000 kroner reward for any tips that could lead to her whereabouts. Police searched the Courceux train station and surrounding areas multiple times, but each search came up empty. They also combed through over 50,000 cell phone records from the night of Emily's disappearance. Whether this produced any leads is unclear, but no expense was spared in the search. Drones, police dogs, dive teams, everything was deployed in the effort to find her. Investigators even shared details with the Interpol, speculating that Emily could have been abducted and taken across the border into Germany. The case triggered a media frenzy across Denmark, and large-scale searches were organized throughout the town. Forests, lakes, and coastal areas were scoured by volunteers in what became the largest volunteer search effort in Denmark's history. Hundreds of people joined the search to find Emily. Initially, some thought Emily might have had an accident on her way home since she would have had to cross a canal. But despite extensive searches in and around Courceux, Nothing was found. A few items, like a bag and a torn shirt that resembled Emily's, were discovered during these searches, but they turned out to be unrelated. Posters with Emily's face were plastered across potential locations, including Copenhagen, in hopes of finding and generating leads. As the summer wore on, it became increasingly evident that foul play was involved. There was no sign that Emily had run away or established a new identity, and no reason for her to do so either. She had no motive, and no trail could be found of her starting a new life elsewhere. The tragic reality of her fate began to sink in. Months passed with occasional news of sightings or new leads, but nothing ever panned out. The case grew cold until Christmas Eve 2016. As if it were fate, or perhaps Emily herself seeking justice, what happened next would send shockwaves through Denmark once again. On Christmas Eve 2016, a local resident walking their dog came across a grisly discovery that would end a months-long search for Emilie Meng. The body of a young girl was found submerged in a small lake near Rijnemaasbakke, Borup, located 60 kilometers from Korsør station, where Emily was last seen. This secluded area, surrounded by waterholes, streams, was far from where anyone had been searching. The body was badly decomposed, having spent months exposed to the elements, but it still bore clues linking it to Emily. Jewelry and a watch, similar to those Emily had worn that night she disappeared, were found on the body. Nearby, a bag from a supermarket chain called Netto was discovered. It contained items that made the connection to Emily even clearer. A pair of partially inside-out jeans believed to belong to her, a lip balm that friends recalled her using frequently, and a headset matching what she had said on the night she vanished. The devastating discovery was soon confirmed. It was Emilie Meng. Thousands of people gathered for a torchlight vigil to mourn the loss of an innocent girl who had touched the hearts of the community. Described by everyone as kind and gentle, Emily's absence left a lasting mark. The police speculated that Emily had been murdered shortly after she had disappeared in July and was then dumped at this isolated location, 40 miles from her home. While there was no way to tell for sure at the time, as you'll see later in the story, there is a possibility that Emily was still alive the day she was kidnapped and could have been saved had the police thoroughly investigated all options sooner. But this is just speculation. One thing is for certain, the reality of what she went through was darker than what anyone had imagined at the time. Forensic pathologist Christina Jacobsen was summoned to the scene to perform an autopsy. By the time the body was found, it had been in the water for at least 3 months, likely longer. During the autopsy, Jacobsen's team noticed something disturbing. There was tape wrapped loosely around the neck and face. When they carefully removed Emily's hair, it became clear that the tape had been over her mouth but had slipped down over time. Despite this discovery, the autopsy found no fractures in her neck and no obvious external injuries. The cause of death could not be determined on site, but Jacobsen suspected suffocation, possibly from a blockage of the airway, either caused internally or through external pressure. One of Emily's legs had detached from the body, but this was attributed to animal activity over the months her remains had been left exposed. Unfortunately, the extensive exposure to the elements hampered the investigation. The longer a body goes undiscovered, the more evidence is lost to time. In fact, that would come back to haunt the police as they struggle to find answers. On a cold day, St. Paul's Church in Korsør hosted a small, private funeral for Emilie Meng. Only her closest friends and family were present to say goodbye to a young girl who, 6 months earlier, had simply walked home listening to music, unaware it would be her final journey. 6 months after Emilie Meng's body was discovered in June 2017, the South Zealand and Lowland Falster police released key findings from their technical analysis of surveillance footage taken from Korsør station. The footage, though grainy and of poor quality, captured a dim image of a passenger car driving around the station's parking lot at approximately 4:07 a.m. on the morning of July 10, 2016, the day Emily disappeared. After months of analyzing the footage with the help of experts, they concluded that the vehicle in question was likely a Hyundai i30, manufactured between 2011 and 2016. Although the lead was promising, the police were still facing mounting pressure. They had interviewed around 650 individuals, filed nearly 2,000 reports, and cross-referenced approximately 400,000 vehicles and phone data in connection to the case. Still, they were no closer to identifying Emily's killer. It wasn't until June 28, 2018, that a potential breakthrough occurred. Amel, the truck driver who had previously been a prime suspect was released due to an alibi, was arrested again, this time for the sexual abuse of a minor who was just 9 years old. Since Amel had been a prime suspect in Emilie's case, his arrest prompted the police to reconsider his involvement. They conducted another investigation into the possible connection to Emilie's disappearance and murder, but once again, he was ruled out. However, he faced serious charges for his crimes against a child, ensuring he was off the streets. By 2019, doubts about the competence of the police investigation began to surface. A Danish documentary cast a harsh light on the investigative failures surrounding Emilie Meng's case, highlighting crucial missteps made in the early stages. The documentary claimed that the police's initial belief that Emilie had chose willingly not to return home hindered an objective investigation from the outset. This assumption led to severe delays in collecting crucial evidence, especially surveillance footage from the night she disappeared. By the time they began requesting footage, much of it had already been blurred or overwritten, particularly from locations like Korsør Station. One of the key failures was the police's focus on the theory that Emilie had left town via train, despite her never being seen in any of the station's cameras. Critics pointed out that no footage had been collected beyond the 30-day retention period, which law enforcement should have acted upon immediately. Vital surveillance footage from surrounding areas such as a nursing home and Shell gas station was also missing from the investigation. If police had checked these cameras in the early stages, they may have captured what truly happened to Emilie after she left the station. In fact, the documentary pointed out the area had 4 roads leading away from the station, and 2 of them headed towards Borup, the direction in which Emilie's body was later found. Surveillance footage from one of these roads may have captured a white van believed to be linked to Emilie's abduction. Maken Lend Rasmussen, a local restaurateur, revealed that the police had requested his surveillance footage, but only after 30 days, by which time it had already been overwritten. According to Danish law, businesses are only required to store footage for 30 days, making it essential that police act swiftly to secure the vital evidence. Similarly, a meat distribution company along the E20 motorway had 3 cameras facing the road, which could have provided clear footage of passing vehicles. Shockingly, police never requested this footage, even though it could have been crucial to tracking Emilie's movements or her killer's vehicle. Former homicide chief Bent Isagar Nielsen stressed that collecting surveillance footage is standard procedure in such cases and that failing to do so in the early stages can deal an irreversible blow to the investigation. He criticized the police for not immediately considering the possibility of foul play. The police later admitted vaguely that certain investigative steps were not taken in the early phase, partly due to their initial assumption that Emilie had run away. This tragic miscalculation may have cost them the chance to capture valuable evidence, potentially bring her killer to justice sooner. Emilie's mother, Helen Meng, voiced her frustration, stating that if the police had taken the case seriously from the beginning, they may have stood a chance of solving the crime. The knowledge that Emilie's killer was still at large haunted her every day. As a result of these oversights and missteps, the case eventually went cold, but it was never forgotten. This was until 2023. On the morning of April 15th, 2023, a 13-year-old girl from Kirkerup was out delivering newspapers on her bicycle. Kirkerup is located roughly 26 kilometers from Korsør, the town where Emilie Meng had been abducted 7 years prior. At around noon, Filippa's mother tried calling her, but her phone went unanswered. Worried, her mother and stepfather, who lived nearby, began driving around Estholtvedt searching for her. They were horrified to find Filippa's bicycle discarded by the side of the road, with her delivery bag tossed aside and her phone partially sticking out. Alarmed, the family immediately called the Lowland Falster police. According to Filippa's step-uncle, officers arrived swiftly, within 10 to 15 minutes, and a large-scale search operation began. Filippa's phone had just pinged off a cell phone tower at 11:14 a.m. and again 15 minutes later, but no further activity was detected after that. Investigators deduced that Filippa had likely been abducted between 11:30 and noon, the time when her mother had tried calling her. The police launched a full-scale search using tracking dogs, drones, and multiple patrols. Later that day, they issued a public appeal, urging residents in the area to check any surveillance or dashcam footage for potential evidence. A breakthrough came when a local resident handed over crucial security footage. The footage, timestamped at 10:56 a.m., showed a 32-year-old man named Philip West leaving his residence in Corsair, driving his black Hyundai. Further surveillance captured the vehicle in the Kirkerup area just 40 minutes later. West was seen driving eastwards before abruptly making a U-turn at 11:40 a.m., just minutes before was abducted at 11:45 a.m. According to the prosecutor's timeline, a nearby camera had filmed cycling past at exactly 11:44 a.m. By the following morning, on April 16, 2023, the police cordoned off West's home as part of their investigation. At 10:57 a.m., the police publicly announced they were working on the assumption that a serious crime had occurred. The case rapidly drew nationwide media attention, and the sleepy town was thrust into the spotlight. At 2:48 p.m., 4 officers arrived at West's home in Corsair. After receiving no response at the door, they smashed the glass pane and prepared for forced entry. Just as they were about to enter, a man appeared inside, Philip West, dressed in only a t-shirt and underwear. He was immediately subdued, tackled to the ground, and handcuffed. Inside the home, officers conducted a quick search. In a dimly lit room, they found she was bound and blindfolded, but alive. The officers immediately worked to calm her, repeatedly assuring her that there were police and she was safe. Confirmed her identity, and her restraints were removed. The police called her mother to relay the news. After 27 hours of terror, was safe. Later that afternoon, police held a press conference at 3 p.m., confirming West's arrest in connection with abduction. In her police statements, recalled being struck from behind by a vehicle before the driver threatened to kill her if she didn't comply. According to the indictment, she was forced into the trunk of West's car and taken to his home. There she was restrained, blindfolded, and held captive in a dark room. A forensic search of West's home uncovered several disturbing details. Investigators found windows covered with blinds and makeshift barricades over the patio door, along with food wrappers scattered around the room where had been held. West's search history revealed that, during the 27 hours was captive, he obsessively followed media coverage of her disappearance. He conducted 28 searches related to the case on news websites and monitored the missing persons Facebook group. His first search was recorded at 7 p.m. on the day of the abduction, just 7 hours after was taken. His last search occurred 20 minutes before the police entered his home. The similarities between abduction and the unsolved case of Emilie Meng prompted police to investigate whether Welch could have been involved in both incidents. On April 24, 2023, investigators began re-examining West's background and discovered that he owned a white Hyundai i30 similar to the vehicle seen near Corsair Station the night Emilie disappeared. West had been questioned during the initial investigation into Meng's disappearance due to his vehicle matching the one spotted on surveillance footage, but at the time, he was ruled out as a suspect. His car had since been sold to a Slovak family in 2021, but Danish police were able to track and impound it in Slovakia for further analysis. In addition, digital forensics revealed that West had deleted large amounts of his illegal content from his devices, much of it involving minors. Investigators also discovered that in 2022, West had submitted a DNA sample as part of a police request from approximately 1,400 former Hyundai i30 owners. Though his DNA did not match any samples collected from Emilie Meng's criminal scene, prosecutors believe this was due to the difficulty of obtaining a clear sample from her remains. Further evidence to link West to Meng's case: his phone records showed suspicious behavior on July 9, 2016, the day before Emilie disappeared. West had made several purchases, including chains, bamboo sticks, and a marinade syringe. That night, his phone was deliberately turned off, a tactic he would use again during abduction. One witness, a motorist, reported seeing a man named Reinemax Bage with an open trunk, struggling to lift a heavy object. This was the same location where Emilie's body was found 6 months later. Interestingly, West's DNA didn't match the samples from Emilie's crime scene. However, police found tape in West's home in 2023 that matched the tape used on Emilie's face and neck in 2016. The resurfacing of these critical details reignited the investigation, leading many to believe that West may have been involved in both crimes, leaving a dark stain on the once quiet community of Corsair. Philip West's trial began on May 14, 2024, not just for one case or two, but for 3 separate cases where he was a suspect. Philip pleaded guilty to only one of these charges. In the case of Emilie Meng, a forensic technician testified that the DNA found on the roll of tape discovered at Philip West's house was, with a probability of 1 in a million, a match from Emilie Meng. Not only that, but the break surface of the tape found on Emilie matched exactly with the tape found in West's home. West's defense argued that he had simply picked up the tape when he was out for a smoke break, driving around the same area where Emilie's body was found. According to them, this created reasonable doubt enough to call the case into question. So, what happened to Emilie during her abduction? To try and answer that, we turn the story to another girl, one who survived and wished to remain anonymous. In November 2022, just 6 months before abduction in 2023, a 15-year-old girl from Sohoi's gymnasium boarding school went for a walk to deal with homesickness. She was on the phone with her mom when out of nowhere she was attacked from behind. At first, she thought it might be a prank, but when she felt the cold steel of a knife and a hand forcefully against her, she knew this was no joke. She was knocked to the ground, and the phone call with her mom abruptly ended. She tried to reach for her phone, to scream for help, but the attacker kicked it away and kept shushing her. As she lay on the ground, the phone kept buzzing. Her father was calling, probably worried at the sudden cutoff. She tried to scare her attacker by telling him, "My mom knows where I am." But he wasn't fazed. He tied her hands in strips and started dragging her across the field. She feared the worst, rape or murder. The attacker kept telling her he wouldn't kill her, but she didn't trust him. For a second, her mind was racing with thoughts of despair. In a deep attempt, she grabbed the knife, but he wrestled it back from her. What stood out to her was that he wasn't wearing gloves. His bare hands had touched everything. In that moment, she clung to the idea that, if nothing else, they'll be able to find her because of that. Realizing she was alone and there was no one to help, she stopped screaming. It felt like she had no choice but to accept what was happening. But then, suddenly, he stopped. He told her to count to 100. Heart racing, terrified that this was some twisted game, she did exactly what she was told, counting loudly while straining to hear his footsteps. After about 20 seconds, she risked a peek back. He was already far away in the distance. Seizing the moment, she ran back into the school, where her parents and the police were waiting. DNA was collected from the scene, and the incident scarred her deeply. After that, she couldn't be alone and needed others to help her feel safe. She was convinced the only reason she survived because of the phone call that spooked the attacker. That DNA, it later matched Philip West when he was arrested in 2023. West's phone was registered in the vicinity of the attack in Sohoi between 5:52 p.m. to 6:33 p.m., aligning with the attack that occurred between 6:12 p.m. and 6:18 p.m. Now, back to Emilie Meng. There was more forensic evidence linking West to Emilie Meng. S.K. Willersev and his team from the Geogenic Institute found male DNA in the inside of Emilie's jeans. Their advanced methods indicated that the DNA likely belonged to Philip West or a close relative, like his grandfather, father, son, or brother. However, this evidence was questioned. The Geogenic Institute wasn't accredited to conduct DNA tests in criminal courses. Their expertise was typically used for archaeological findings, not modern-day investigations. This was the first time their methods were applied to a high-profile criminal case like this. Forensic experts from the Institute of Forensic Medicine weighed in, saying the results only suggested a link to West and they couldn't confirm it definitively. The prosecutor brought forward a witness who claimed to have seen a white car on the morning Emilie Meng disappeared. The witness saw a man carrying something heavy and remembered the license plate had the letter B in it. Interestingly, West owned a light-color Hyundai i30 that summer, and that plate also began with the letter B. The prosecutor also emphasized how difficult it had been to get DNA samples from the car in 2022. But the defense raised doubts, pointing out the witness described a closed sedan, whereas West's car was a hatchback with a fully operating tailgate. The timeline didn't quite add up either. The witness claimed to have passed the area between 7:30 and 7:45 a.m., but West had used his payment card to fuel up in Slalske at 8:11 a.m., which was 45 kilometers away. Under normal driving conditions, that trip would take 33 minutes, leaving only 8 minutes for West to dispose of Emilie's body in the lake. So who is Philip West? Philip Patrick West, also known as Koso Mandel, was born on March 30th, 1991. And he was a marketing executive at a company in Sohoi. His career was going well. He had his own car and a detached house in a small Zealand town of Sevenstrup. According to his friends with whom he had lived at one point, he was an introvert who allegedly never had a girlfriend but could talk to people, especially women, if he had some alcohol beforehand. He avoided making eye contact but would still hang out with friends. They described Phyllis West as a good companion and thought he was asexual due to his appearance and avoidance of discussing sexuality. His friends were shocked to learn of his arrest for the involvement in the abduction of a 13-year-old girl. According to the prosecution, Philip West secretly harbored very sadistic and gruesome fantasies against young girls. His mental evaluation, presented in court on June 14th, indicated that he is normally gifted but has antisocial personality traits, though not to the extent of being a psychopath. The prosecution claimed he had sadistic desires since his teenage years and is considered, quote, severely perverted. The evaluation also stated that he poses a significant danger to the life, body, and health of others. It was also documented that on 14th June, that large amounts of videos and images of extreme deviant nature, fantasies of women being strangled and hanged, were found in Philip Patrick West's computer. These images were divided into categories such as death porn, necrophilia, drowning, hanging, and were images primarily showing the fate of women with the relevant categories. They also found photos and addresses of real young women and directions to their homes. The courtroom also learned that West had written 2 stories of a total of 70 pages in which girls at the Sorhoy area are subjected to deprivation of liberty, humiliation, and gross abuse. The verdict. In June 2024, Philip West was convicted of attempted rape and attempted long-term detention of Emilie Meng, but not for the actual rape and long-term deprivation of liberty of her, because the courtroom assessed that it could not be proven that these acts actually occurred. However, there was an intention, and therefore he was sentenced for the attempt. West was also convicted of long-term deprivation of liberty, attempted murders, and several sexual assaults of the 13-year-old girl, as well as an assault on a 15-year-old secondary student in Sorhoy. Lastly, he was found guilty of the murder of Emilie Meng and the abductions of the 2 other girls. The court emphasized that the murder and attempted murder were committed with a sexual motive on persons under the age of 18, according to the presiding judge. Court chairman Bo Rasmussen added that the crimes were marked by a special recklessness and were planned. Philip West has been ordered to pay compensation totaling more than Danish krone 574,000 or around $86,000 to the victims and their families. Emilie Meng's mother was awarded 140,000 Danish krone or 20,000 USD, and her 2 siblings received 50,000 Danish krone or 7,500 USD. The 13-year-old girl received 295,000 Danish krone or 45,000 USD. And finally, the 15-year-old schoolgirl from Sorhoy is owed 40,000 Danish krone or 6,000 USD. On June 28th, Philip West was sentenced to life imprisonment for his crimes. His lawyer stated that he would be appealing the sentence for an acquittal or a mitigation immediately. The High Court will be reviewing this appeal, and the date is still pending. At the end, though, we must remember the victims who were wronged by this monster, by this wolf in sheep's clothing. Emilie Meng was genuinely described by all as a good person, and it makes us wonder, why do so many bad things happen to good people? Philip West, on the other hand, is a slave to his own dark desires, and it's very possible that his lawyer's appeal could get him a reduced sentence. Emily's mother, Helen, has been very vocal at her dissatisfaction at the police work, especially during the early hours. But we must remember, ultimately, there's only one person to blame for all this, and that's Philip West. I dedicate this episode to Emilie Meng in loving memory.